Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms is taking on another province as it fights for churches. This time, it's the BC government. Frustration is mounting with Alberta mayors as the province moves ahead with its plan to centralize EMS services in an effort to save money. And Democrats in the U.S. are demanding that U.S. President Donald Trump be impeached and removed from office right away. We will explain why.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney offered an update as to the COVID-19 vaccine rollout in our province on Monday. Kenney says more healthcare workers and resources will be available to help as many Albertans to get vaccinated as quickly as possible. Kenney also addressed the vaccine shortage in our province and putting more pressure on Ottawa for more doses.
I've urged them, as have all the other premiers, to do everything they possibly can to expand supply. And I hope part of that will involve the fastest possible Health Canada consideration of and prospective approval of new vaccines. For example, I know the United Kingdom has approved the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine and Health Canada has not. Of course, we want Canada to maintain high standards, but this is, if there was ever an emergency, this is it. And I hope that they have Health Canada operating around the clock to ensure the fastest possible approval times.
The province says 45,000 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine have now been administered to Albertans. Many Lethbridge business owners shared a call to action post on social media recently, saying they were opening their business today regardless of provincial health restrictions. Loris Alexander reached out to a couple of those business owners to hear their story.
We have 0 cases linked to any shops all over Alberta. So to get praises from Jason Kenney and all of a sudden to be shut down for doing nothing but the best we can possibly do and to keeping people safe and to keeping people clean is ridiculous. There's no reason for us to be shut down.
It'd be one thing if I had a business and I did a poor job of managing it, I wasn't a good instructor, and people didn't want to train here, and it wasn't a viable business anymore. That would be a reason to go out of business. But when you have a successful business with the people working with you, and they're paying their bills because of the business that you built, and then the government just randomly comes in and decides, no, you don't get to have a business, but everybody else does, that's a problem.
Most recently, we learned of an avalanche of elected officials traveling out of the country for vacation, or to put it in their own words, non-essential business.
It's kind of a slap in the face. I mean, and then for him to sit there and say, well, it's okay, I think we can safely travel. Yeah, you're saying that now after they've been caught.
For them to come back on us before and everything saying, don't be open, it's too dangerous. Don't travel, you stay home, don't visit your family at Thanksgiving, don't visit your family at Christmas, it's too dangerous. You're risking the lives of everyone around you. If it's really that dangerous, then they shouldn't have gone anywhere.
Both Woods and Means say they've received some hate online after announcing they would reopen today.
So they get lots of hate comments and whatever, but again, they're not going to come say that to my face because they're a bunch of chickens. They're hiding on a keyboard. The government's not going to come here personally. They're going to sit up there and send somebody else. They're chickens as well. I welcome the fight in the courtroom, which I'm going to do. I'm going to welcome the fight on the street. I don't care.
This is turning everyone against each other and telling me that you wish I get COVID or my family or my son gets COVID. It's just not the right thing to do.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Southern Roots Hair Design in Lethbridge was one of the many salons that were forced to shut their doors due to the government restrictions. The salon is running a bottle drive to help out with funds needed to keep the company afloat. Company owner Davida Deering says that the government has simply not done enough to help small business owners during this period.
I feel like the government forgets that all small businesses are so different and not all of them run the same as a big business. So we don't all fall under the same category. I think it's really frustrating when they've given us so many rules and we follow everything to a T. We've never had one transmission through a salon and they still shut us down. It's hard. I just want them to see that we're clean, we're following all the rules that we can, and we just want to come back to work.
Deering says the bottle drive money will be used to pay for rent and bills. She says anything beyond that will go toward another small business which may also be struggling. If you're planning on doing some downtown shopping in Lethbridge, you'll once again have to pay for parking soon. The city says beginning Monday, January 18th, paid parking will be enforced once again. As part of a Christmas holiday promotion, paid parking in downtown Lethbridge was temporarily suspended since December the 14th. In a media release today, the city also says 2 downtown monthly parking incentives have been extended until the end of March. They include 50% reductions at both Zone 10 and the Lethbridge Park and Ride Transit Terminal. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman says attempts to connect with Alberta Premier Jason Kenney and Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro about integrated EMS systems have fallen on deaf ears. Spearman, alongside the mayors of Calgary, Red Deer, and Wood Buffalo, hosted a media avail to highlight the switch of local EMS dispatch to one provincial system. Bridge City News has been following the story closely, and Ainsley O'Reilly has an update for us.
4 previous Alberta governments have overturned the decision to centralize EMS dispatch, but the current government will not budge. The new provincial system, imposed back in August, will begin on Tuesday, and mayors of all 4 municipalities say they have yet to receive a formal response from the provincial government.
The government could correct this in the interests of all Albertans. It's time to act, Mr. Kenney. You either have to support your health minister or support Albertans.
It's not a hypothetical question. It's a question about people's actual safety.
The integrated system will go from 7 dispatch centers to 3. Health Minister Tyler Shandro says the move will save the province $9 million. Lethbridge, however, will need to hire additional firefighters, costing roughly $5 million a year, as well as added resources, putting taxpayers on the hook for nearly $5 million annually. The city offered up $1.2 million to retain the system.
We have been supplementing. The various provincial governments have not taken any action to provide an alternative service to provide interfacility transfers. So I think it's shocking.
Calgary, Red Deer, and the municipality of Wood Buffalo officials call the move reckless and say emergency response times will be affected. They argue questions have been left unanswered when it comes to remote communities, as well as overall EMS data. Bridge City News reached out to Shandro and UCP East MLA Nathan Neudorf with no response. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Dogs really are man's best friend. There's a special bond with our 4-legged furry friends. Now, for one Lethbridge Police Service officer, his work with his canine partner is coming to an end. As Micah Quinn explains now, the police dog is settling nicely into his retirement.
After 9 years, Arco the police service dog is retiring. Constable Jim Damone says that the bond between him and Arco is unlike any other.
To go to work with your dog every day, to go to some of the calls that we've been through that are, kind of scary or pretty high adrenaline type things, it's pretty cool.
Damone and Arco worked together on the streets of Lethbridge from Boxing Day of 2011, and their last shift was January 5th of this year.
I've done so many things with Arco that I wouldn't believe before I had gotten Arco that I'd be able to do. We've caught a lot of people that we wouldn't have otherwise caught without the use of a dog and his nose. There's too many to pick just one. We've just had a really incredible career, and I'm going to miss working with them, that's for sure.
Damone says that the biggest tool the dogs have is their sense of smell.
We're able to use them to either follow odor or find somebody who's hiding or find evidence that has been thrown away or things like that. And there's so many cases where we use them to do those things that you wouldn't be able to use a human to achieve those things. So the people that they've found that we didn't know were hiding in areas, the people that they've located through following their track over a couple of kilometers, say through the coulees or wherever, finding evidence that we wouldn't have otherwise found, it's huge. It plays a big part in policing.
You might be wondering what's next for Arco now that he's retired. How about a little rest and relaxation?
Now that he's retired, I leave the dog run open, and he has the whole backyard. He likes to lay on the deck in the sun and just hang out for the day. He likes to eat people food now that he's retired. And actually the other night I let him on the couch for the first time in his life. So I think he really enjoyed that too.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
A woman in High River has filed a formal complaint asking police to investigate potential criminal negligence in the death of her father. Benito Quesada worked at the Cargill meat processing plant near High River, where at least 950 staff and close to half of the workforce tested positive for COVID-19 in early May. It remains one of the largest workplace outbreaks in all of Canada. Alberta reported 811 new cases of the coronavirus on Sunday, along with 12 new deaths. Officials said as of late Sunday, the South Zone had 297 active cases, and here in Lethbridge, there are currently 106 active cases. Fortunately, more than 96,000 Albertans have also recovered from the novel coronavirus. Dozens of worshippers attended a service at Fairview Baptist Church in Calgary yesterday, while police joined Alberta Health Service officials outside beforehand. Pastor Tim Stevens said police and AHS inspectors went inside to take measurements, but did not issue any more fines. An AHS executive order claimed only 2 of 75 congregants wore masks at a service there last week, and the church was fined $1,200. Faith services are permitted under Alberta's current public health restrictions, but are limited to 15% of fire code capacity. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted many nonprofit groups across the country, including those in places of worship. Many churches are struggling, especially those which are not set up to provide online services. The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms has filed a legal challenge against the BC government defending churches and the rights of clergy. Joining me now to talk about this is the president of the Justice Centre, John Carpe. So John, at issue are the restrictions placed on worship services and peaceful protests?
They're impacting the freedom of religion that's protected by the Charter, taken away from churches the freedom to meet together, which is something that churches believe they are called by God to do. So when the government says you can't meet together, or even if you can't sing, that's a direct attack on the religious freedom that's protected by the Charter. And so now British Columbia is the third province after Alberta and Manitoba that the Justice Centre is taking to court for a court order to end the lockdowns, which we say are unreasonable and unjustified violations of our charter freedoms.
So John, how much of a struggle has it been for many pastors and churches in Canada?
It's been a battle for months on end. Back in April and May, we had Saskatchewan and Ontario that were making it illegal for drive-in church services. So even for members of a church to come drive into the church parking lot and sit in their cars, not get out of their cars, and listen to a church service by radio. We had attempts in Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Manitoba to make that illegal. And in all three cases, the Justice Centre sent a legal warning letter or filed a court action, and the government's backed down. And I think it's important for pastors to stand up for religious freedom, because if you don't stand up for it, the government will walk all over you and the restrictions would become more and more severe. So it's really important for people to exercise courage.
That was John Carpe, president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining me via Zoom from Calgary. Full-time in-person classes resumed in Alberta schools today, along with some places in Saskatchewan, but the wait in Manitoba will be a little longer. A full return to classes in Manitoba will not happen until January the 18th. In-person learning, however, has been available as an option for children in kindergarten through grade 6, also for older special needs kids. In Saskatchewan, Greater Saskatoon Catholic Schools welcomed students back last week, and Regina Public Schools were set to resume in-person learning today. Saskatchewan reported no new COVID-19 related deaths yesterday for the first time in a week. The province did report, however, 307 new cases of the novel coronavirus, along with 187 people in hospital. In central Canada, COVID-19 cases continue to soar. Ontario reported 3,338 new infections today. It also reported another 29 deaths this morning, pushing the province's total death count since the pandemic began to more than 5,000 people. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says there will be an announcement about new restrictions sometime tomorrow. Meanwhile, in Quebec, that province reported 1,869 new cases of COVID-19 earlier today. When it comes to surgeries in Canada, many have been cancelled or postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. When it comes to overall wait times, how does Canada really stack up compared to other countries? Bacchus Barua, Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute, did a study and gave us his thoughts.
They all tend to do three things differently. The first is they have a very different approach to the private sector. Unlike in Canada, where we see them as sort of the antithesis of our public healthcare system, over there they embrace them as either a partner to help deliver on the universal promise, or as an alternative to say, okay, when the public system is burdened, patients can access these services privately. The second is they expect patients to share in the cost of treatment. Now, this is something that can be very controversial in Canada, but most of the universal healthcare systems do expect small co-payments related to your income, and with caps so that it's never a financial burden.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Barua, who will also discuss why wait times are not coming down when healthcare spending is going up. That's coming up later in our newscast. As COVID-19 cases continue to surge across Southern California, hospitals there are struggling to cope with the daily impact on staff and resources.
This past week has been probably the hardest week for me physically and emotionally as a nurse. I've been here 21 years, and I've seen more people pass away in the past week, in the past couple of weeks really, than I almost like it combined in all of my career as a nurse. It's been really hard physically and emotionally. We're seeing patients who are maxed out on oxygen, who are basically just suffering. They want to die. They're telling us they want to die, but their families don't want to let them go because they can't be here to understand what they're going through.
Just today we had 2 deaths on this unit. And that's pretty the norm. I usually see 1 to 2 every shift. It's super sad. And they fight every day, and they struggle to breathe every day, even with tons of oxygen, and then you just see them die. They just die, and they fight dying, and it's so sad.
Johns Hopkins University is reporting that California has recorded more than 30,000 COVID-related deaths since the pandemic started. Members of New York's congressional delegation met over the weekend demanding the removal of U.S. President Donald Trump from office. They're looking to impeach once again.
The insurrection that was violently perpetrated by enemy combatants and seditionists was an attempt to halt a constitutional process and overthrow the government. It was an act of sedition that was incited and encouraged by Donald Trump. Every second, every minute, every day that Donald Trump remains in office presents a clear and present danger to the health, safety, and well-being of the American people and our democracy. That is why the House is pursuing every available means at our disposal to accomplish the objective of holding the President of the United States accountable.
Now, as a follow-up to that story, Republicans have blocked a resolution in the House calling on U.S. Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the constitutional authority to remove U.S. President Donald Trump from office. Well, we had a mainly cloudy day today in the Windy City, and those Chinook winds were blowing nice and strong, weren't they? The wind also brought us some warmer temperatures. But how long will the above-zero values remain? Full weather details are coming up. The Chinook winds brought us some much warmer temperatures across a lot of southwestern Alberta again. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a full look at the weather picture. Jeanette, the clouds may be sticking around for a while, and we may even see some moisture developing too.
Yeah, that's right, Hal. We could see a bit of rain coming at us on Wednesday, but mainly partly cloudy skies until then. And windy in the Windy City, as you were mentioning before, 80 kilometer per hour gusts this evening into tomorrow, 50 to 70 kilometer per hour wind gusts as well. Mainly partly cloudy skies tomorrow on Tuesday. High of 9 degrees, high of 8 on Wednesday, and a 60% chance of rain like we were talking about before. Mainly sunny skies on Thursday and Friday with a high of 3 and 4. 5 degrees at the even high there on Saturday and Sunday with partly cloudy skies for both of those days. So we're seeing temperatures well above average. Average for this time of year is -2, average low -14. 14 was the high temperature back in 1987, and our chilliest day on record, look at that, -42 in 1997. 8:25 is when the sun rose this morning, and our evening sunset tonight, 4:54 p.m. 4:54 p.m. There we go, just before 5 o'clock. So days are getting longer. Over on the West Coast tomorrow, expect a lot of rain. 5 to 10 millimeters expected in Victoria. More than 20 millimeters expected in Vancouver tomorrow. 13 the high for Victoria, 10 for Vancouver, 3 the high in Edmonton with mainly sunny skies, and 7 the high in Calgary with a mix of sun and cloud. Both of those prairie cities, by the way, can expect 40 kilometer per hour wind gusts. Same thing for the Saskatchewan cities here. Saskatoon, 40 k per hour wind gusts, mix of sun and cloud, high 0 0, high of 2 in Regina, and high of 1 in Winnipeg with sunny skies. It will be clearing. So first of all, we're going to get a lot of clouds in Winnipeg. They're going to wake up to some fog. Then it's going to clear. Toronto, -1 is the high, mix of sun and cloud. Ottawa could get a chance of flurries tomorrow with a high of 0. Mix of sun and cloud also expected tomorrow in Montreal with a high of -2. Now let's take a look at Atlantic Canada. Fredericton could see a 30% chance of flurries, high of -1. 4 degrees, the high in Halifax. Halifax could get a chance of flurries or showers, also a mix of freezing rain there. Chance of flurries in Charlottetown, high of 0. -1 the high in St. John's with a mix of sun and cloud. There you go, that is your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you by Supplements King in Red Deer and Lethbridge, Canada's workout and nutrition products retailer.
A lot of talk around the water cooler these days was the fact that U.S. President Donald Trump was permanently barred from the platform Twitter. As a result, Twitter lost $5 billion in market value. Not million, but billion. That translated to a drop in 12% of its stock price. The tumble followed the social media giant's claim that it suspended Trump's account due to the risk of further incitement of violence. This is in connection with thousands of his supporters who laid siege of the Capitol last week. Trump, who had around 88 million followers, generated enormous publicity for the platform with his controversial tweets over the past 6 years. The CEO of the Royal Bank says an economic rebound will not begin in Canada until at least 4 million high-risk residents receive COVID-19 vaccinations. Dave Mackay estimates the country could still reach that target in 2021. So far, just under 400,000 vaccines have been given out in Canada. He says he expects the country's recovery could be retail-led or consumer-led. Mackay says Canadians were offered billions in government aid during the pandemic and managed to save a lot of money because of restrictions on travel and entertainment. Maple Leaf Foods is buying a food processing plant in Indianapolis, Indiana, to meet the growing demand for a plant-based protein made from soybeans called tempeh. The Toronto-based company says the deal, worth around $100 million US, is expected to close in early April. Maple Leaf says it will then install production equipment with initial capacity to generate around 4.5 million kilograms of the product. Westwind Aviation has appointed its third CEO in the last 11 months. The Northern Saskatchewan Airlines says that Derek Neese will be taking over the role from Stephen Smith on February 1st. Westwind says Smith, who was given the job last February, had only been serving as CEO on an interim basis and will continue as chairman of the board. Neese has served as a senior executive with a number of airlines, including Inter-Canadian Airlines and Paskin Aviation. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 107 points on the day to finish at 17,934. The Dow was down 89 points to 31,008. The S&P 500 was down 25 points to 3799, and the Nasdaq was down 165 points on the day to 13,036. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 6 cents to 52.18 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 9 cents to 2.79 US. Gold was down 48 cents to 18.4341 US an ounce, and silver was unchanged on the day at 24.92 US an ounce. Wheat is at $277 per metric ton, barley's at $279, canola's at $670, and corn is at $318 per metric ton. Live cattle were down $1.08 to $113.40. Feeder cattle were up 8 cents to $136.90, and lean hogs were down 23 cents to $68.48. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.26 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms in Calgary has launched a legal challenge against the BC government. The group is fighting for various churches and protesters who say their constitutional rights and freedoms are being violated through the various government restrictions during the pandemic. John Carpe, who's the president of the Justice Centre, says BC is the third province to receive a filing. The other two are Alberta and Ontario. When it comes to wait times for surgery, where does Canada rank compared with the rest of the world? Bacchus Barua, Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute, will give us his thoughts from a recent report in just a moment. A new study has found the wait times when it comes to our healthcare industry reached 22.6 weeks last year in 2020. That is the longest ever recorded and 143% higher than the 9.3 weeks Canadians waited back in 1993 when wait times were originally tracked. Joining me now to talk about this is Bacchus Barua, the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies with the Fraser Institute in Vancouver, and one of the co-authors of the study, which you can read by visiting the Fraser Institute's website. Bacchus, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You bet. Now, first of all, I think people might argue that the longer wait times in 2020 were simply because of COVID and the crisis going on right now. Is that the case, or is there evidence to suggest otherwise?
You know, I think it's important to say up front that our healthcare workers are just doing a fantastic job, and they deserve all of our support and all of our gratefulness and appreciation for the terrific hardships that they've faced. 2020 was, of course, a very difficult year for a number of different reasons. And one of them shows in our survey, and that's that Canadians across the country were waiting longer than we've ever recorded in our survey. As you mentioned, the average wait time that we saw between getting a referral to getting treatment was 22.6 weeks. Now, absolutely, COVID will have likely had an impact on those wait times. But one of the things that we can do is we can actually just look at what wait times were the year before. So when we look at wait times in 2019, we actually find that the wait time even then was at about 21 weeks. So I think what the survey is telling us is that COVID has likely exacerbated the wait time situation. But unfortunately, wait times have been a historical issue in Canada and seem to persist and only get worse because of the current pandemic.
Now, Bacchus, can you explain exactly how you measure the wait times?
You know, we've been doing this study for almost 30 years now. And the way that we do it is we try and contact every single doctor who is part of the Canadian Medical Association. This year, we're looking at about more than 10,000 doctors who we tried to contact. We have responses from about 1,200 doctors, which is lower than usual, lower than other years. It's about 11%, but because we're serving the population of physicians, that's still a very large number. In Alberta, it's almost 200 doctors who responded to our survey. So these are, real experiences from real doctors. We're looking at 12 different specialties. These are specialties that were decided in conjunction on the advice of the British Columbia Medical Association in the early 1990s. It's, like I said, a very old survey. And, fortunately in Alberta, we do seem to have responses from about 200 physicians in those 12 specialties.
So how bad are things really? What are doctors telling us? To what degree are patients having to wait for treatment after seeing a specialist?
Well, as you mentioned, we're actually looking at two different portions of the wait time. The first wait that patients face is between getting a referral to seeing the specialist, and that's at about 10 weeks. And then there's a further wait from seeing a specialist to actually receiving treatment, which is at about 12 weeks. Most governments have usually tended to focus on that second wait time, and although there have been some very good improvements about tracking that first wait as well. But when we're looking exclusively at that second wait, when essentially a physician and a patient have decided that treatment is required, we're seeing that physicians are reporting that their patients are waiting about 4 weeks longer than what they consider to be clinically reasonable. And that number is even longer when we look at Alberta, where it jumps up to almost 6 weeks longer than what is clinically reasonable. Never mind what is actually comfortable and desired by the patient themselves.
So Bacchus, big picture right now, are wait times actually improving in Canada, or are we getting progressively worse?
Unfortunately, it's bad news. As I mentioned, we've been tracking this for 30 years. When we started the survey, the wait time was only 9.3 weeks. And even at that time, that caused a huge stir. But unfortunately, over time, we're seeing wait times go up and up every single year. And this year, it's 22.6 weeks. As you mentioned, COVID has likely impacted that wait time, but this is a long historic issue that we've struggled to grapple with. And unfortunately, we don't look like we're winning that fight right now.
But aren't we spending more tax dollars than ever before in healthcare? And if that's the case, why on earth are wait times getting so much longer?
We saw massive increases in healthcare spending, particularly between 2000 and 2010. We've seen, some dips in that spending, never decreases, but the slowing of the rate of growth in the middle of the 2010s to 2015-16. And again, we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick back in the spending. Unfortunately, the answer is, I don't know. We're not seeing that money translate into shorter wait times, despite there being several programs that actually target those funds into tackling wait times. What we're seeing consistently is that regardless of what's being spent, wait times have increased over time. The one thing that we haven't really tried, or that very few provinces have tried, is actually looking at differences in policy. Now, some of that is restricted with regards to what provinces can do within the confines of the Canada Health Act, but there are a number of things that provinces could potentially try. But unfortunately, we live in a bit of a risk-averse environment when it comes to policy, where essentially a lot of politicians try to not touch healthcare lest they get a lot of backlash, which is very unfortunate because essentially it means we're going to be stuck with the problems that we've seen historically.
I'm curious to know which province had the longest wait times and which one had the shortest.
Unfortunately, we do see the longest wait times in most of the Atlantic provinces, particularly in Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia, where wait times are crossing 40 weeks. Now, this has been a historical departure. The Atlantic provinces have traditionally struggled a little bit more than the Canadian average, but those differences were much, much smaller in 1993 and 1994 when we started measuring it, and that gap has only widened over time. Unfortunately, in our study, we can't actually pinpoint and identify why those differences occur, but this is precisely why we do the studies, to say, hey, there are differences amongst these provinces. Have a look. Let's try and understand what's actually going on in these different provinces.
So what can we do, or maybe the government do, to try and improve those wait times?
I think in this global scenario, one of the things that COVID has done is brought the world together in a very unique way. It's made us much more aware of different parts of the world, of the same and similar struggles that we face, and the fact that there are several other healthcare systems that we can learn from. I think one of the things that is important for Canadians to know is that we aren't alone or unique in our desire to have a universal healthcare system. There are at least 28 other countries with universal healthcare around the world. These are countries like Switzerland, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, France, Australia. They all share the same goal, but they have far more resources than we do. They have much shorter wait times. Canada, in fact, is ranked somewhere close to the bottom when it comes to physicians, close to the bottom when it comes to beds, and certainly lots when it comes to our healthcare wait times. We do well on certain other things, but these are clearly areas where we're falling behind. I think it would be a really good first step to say, what are the things that these other countries do differently? What can we learn from them? And what can we actually use in a Canadian context? Unfortunately, if we don't do that, if we stick with the policies that we have, we're also going to stick with the problems and the failures that we have in the Canadian system. All I think everybody wants to do is to try and improve the healthcare system to the best that they can.
Are you finding that more and more Canadians are deciding to, skip the queue and maybe go down to the United States for their surgeries, or even further south to Mexico?
No, this is something that this particular study is not being looked at. We have a bit of a tangential way to try and understand how many Canadians are actually traveling outside of Canada, not particularly in the US or other countries. But we're relying on doctors knowing that's what's happened. And it's difficult that patients would generally tell their doctors. There are, however, some other wonderful studies actually done by a Canadian institute, Second Street Consulting, that I think identified more than 200,000 Canadians who traveled abroad. Our last estimate was that it was about 50,000. But again, this is for the procedures that we're looking at, and I think are likely conservative estimates.
So circling back to Canada here and Western Canada, how well did Alberta rank when it came to wait times?
Unfortunately, Alberta is facing some very, very serious challenges. Alberta is ranking 7th out of the 10 provinces. The wait time is longer than the national average, and it's certainly longer than some of the top performing provinces like Ontario and Quebec, and indeed even Saskatchewan and BC. The total wait time that we measured in Alberta last year was 29 weeks. And as we talked about earlier, the national average in Canada is 22.6 weeks. So even though we are seeing historically high records in Canada, that same story is true in Alberta, but to an even greater extent, where the 29-week wait is, again, the longest that we've ever recorded in Alberta's history.
Now, among the various specialties out there, national wait times were longest between a referral by a GP and ophthalmology surgery, 34.1 weeks. What's the reason for such long wait times for eye surgery?
We're actually seeing very similar long wait times for orthopedic surgery and elective plastic surgery as well. These be a little bit of a mixed bag together with these three procedures. In Canada, we generally have a triage system like most other countries where, if you're a patient who is looking for medical or radiation oncology, you are going to get obviously prioritized. The problem is in Canada, everybody else really seems to be brushed off and expected to wait almost years for treatment. Again, in Alberta, actually, if we look at otolaryngology and orthopedic surgery, the wait time is at or in excess of 1 year. Essentially, we're in a situation where, if you have a serious condition, yes, our healthcare system is probably pretty good and will try and save you. Unfortunately, if it's something that won't kill you immediately, if it's something that is just going to be painful for people for a long time, you're expected to live with it and just put up with the long wait time. And I think that's really what we need to remember. These are real patients that we need to take care of.
Now, the shortest wait times are for medical oncology, which is a pretty good thing for cancer patients. I think it's just over 4 weeks, correct?
Absolutely. We are seeing much shorter wait times for medical and radiation oncology, which is about 4 or 5 weeks in those procedures. But again, this is really getting back to, yes, we should celebrate those wins, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that we should forget all those other patients, those patients who are waiting 34 weeks on average for eye surgery, those patients who in Alberta are waiting over a year for orthopedic surgery. We need to find a little bit of a balance to try and figure out how we can actually attend to all of these patients, or at the very least try and give them some sort of option or alternative for recourse when the public system cannot help them because of the burden and pressure it's under.
As you know, Bacchus, the COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating for people's mental health all across North America and around the world. Do we know if wait times for psychiatrists and psychologists have increased due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, our survey can give us a little bit of an understanding. We are asking psychiatrists how long their patients are waiting for treatment, and our estimate is actually very similar to the estimate for the 12 procedures. It's somewhere about between 22 and 23 weeks. But I do need to provide caution because we do have a much lower response rate for psychiatry this year. But again, this is something where if we look at it historically, in general, we are finding excessively long waits. A very similar story where patients are waiting longer than what's considered to be clinically reasonable for psychiatry patients as well.
What about wait times when it comes to various diagnostic procedures such as MRIs or CAT scans? What are we looking at there?
This is a really critical issue. We talked about triaging, and one of the key tools that we need for triaging is access to diagnostic technology in a timely manner. Unfortunately, again, we are seeing incredibly long wait times for these diagnostic procedures. For MRIs, it's about 11 weeks in Canada. For CT scans, it's about 5 weeks. And again, in Alberta, this is an area where Alberta is really, really struggling. For MRIs, the average wait time in Alberta is in excess of 25, I believe it's 26 weeks. And for CT scans, it's about 14 weeks. So, huge issues there. We can't really expect to have a functioning triage system if patients can't get diagnosed on time. So this is really something we need to work on and focus on, I think, quite urgently.
So what can we really do to improve our healthcare performance? What can we learn from other countries who are doing so much better than Canada?
That's a difficult question. What I can say is that there is a set of universal healthcare countries that tend to have more resources, shorter wait times, and are spending about the same as we do. These are countries like Australia, France, Germany, Sweden, Netherlands, Switzerland. They all tend to do three things differently. The first is they have a very different approach to the private sector. Unlike in Canada, where we see them as sort of the antithesis of our public healthcare system, over there they embrace them as either a partner to help deliver on the universal promise, or as an alternative to say, okay, when the public system is burdened, patients can access these services privately. The second is they expect patients to share in the cost of treatment. Now, this is something that can be very controversial in Canada, but most of the universal healthcare systems do expect small co-payments related to your income and with caps so that it's never a financial burden. The third thing is that they fund their hospitals based on activity. This incentivizes hospitals and pays them every time a patient comes in. In Canada, because of our government-only approach, we have what's called global budgets. And essentially, while that's good at controlling costs, what it does is it sort of makes hospitals see patients as a cost in an economic term, because every time a patient comes in, they're eating into that budget. Now, It's not to say any one of these things will magically fix Canada's healthcare system or that they may even be palatable in Canada's context. But it's important to know that these are things that other countries that do have shorter wait times while having universal healthcare do differently. So let's try and figure out what actually works in a Canadian context to just help all these patients who are waiting inordinately long for their medical treatment.
Bacchus Brewer, the Associate Director, Health Policy Studies with the Fraser Institute, and one of the co-authors of the study, Waiting Your Turn, Wait Times for Healthcare in Canada. Thanks for joining me today from Vancouver.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Life is often filled with challenges, unexpected events, sickness, job loss, death, broken families, and the list goes on. Responses to these difficulties vary widely, from the extreme of suicide to recovery and building a successful life. Today's guests are no stranger to this. Chad and Kathy Robichaux. Chad is a former Force Recon Marine who served 8 tours of duty in Afghanistan, a former police officer and champion mixed martial arts fighter. He's also the author of An Unfair Advantage, Victory in the Midst of Battle. Chad and Kathy, thank you so much for joining us via Skype from the Woodlands, Texas, right?
Yes, thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. So first of all, can you give us a brief snapshot of what your book is about and who it's for?
Yeah, well, my book is about a lot of my experiences through life as a Marine, my time in Afghanistan, my time as a professional fighter, and a lot of challenges I faced in life, which are no different than many people challenges people face in their everyday life. But more importantly, how do we move forward? I found myself suffering with some of the same things that many military warriors suffer with today. In the United States, we have over 20 suicides per day. Divorce rates are over 80% in combat veterans. Those being diagnosed with PTSD is 30 to 40%. So a lot of people are struggling with a lot of things. And I found a way forward through the restoration of my faith, through a relationship with Christ, and applying biblical principles in my life that helped me to move forward. So I share all that in the book, and just really laying a pathway forward for those who struggle with all of life's issues.
Wow. So tell us a bit about the Mighty Oaks Foundation, which you and your wife decided to start.
Yes, after my time coming home from Afghanistan, like I said, we faced many things as a family with my diagnosis of PTSD, a near divorce in our family, my personal battle with suicide, and then on the other side of that, finding hope and restoration in our family and the ability to move forward. We want to share that, what we discovered, with others. And so we founded Mighty Oaks Foundation. It was almost 10 years ago now. We've run both resiliency and recovery programs. In our resiliency programs, I speak on active duty military bases around the world. I've spoken about 150,000 active duty troops, given away about 100,000 copies of my books in these events. We get lots of requests from units all over the world, and to do those programs. And then we have recovery programs where we run 30 camps per year. Our camps are 6 days long. They're non-clinical, faith-based peer-to-peer mentoring programs. And we've had over 4,000 people come through those programs between active duty, military veterans, and spouses. And Kathy's, and her team's able to talk to a lot of the spouses about where they struggle with on the spouse side of things.
Chad, what kinds of things did you experience in Afghanistan that ended up causing the post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, I think for me, it was going to Afghanistan and not being completely prepared. The military talks about the pillars of resiliency: mind, body, spirit, social, being mentally tough, physically tough, having a strong spiritual foundation, and being surrounded by the right people in a social network. I think I would have believed I was prepared in all those areas, but for me, my spiritual foundation was broken. I didn't really have a relationship with God as I should have going into that environment and being exposed to such evil atrocities that you see in a place like Afghanistan. And over time, those things made me angry. They made me frustrated. I became very intense person, and those things being not rectified or unchecked in my life began to manifest in physiological symptoms, which later began as panic attacks and eventually being diagnosed with PTSD. I lost some team members there. A lot of Afghans that worked for me were killed there, and just the loss of friends, seeing things, the oppression of the Afghan people, the just hardships on Afghan people that the Taliban imposed on them, particularly the sexual molestation of children and the way the Taliban, treat the Afghan people, really made me have a hatred inside of me that just surfaced and manifested in all these symptoms that I dealt with PTSD.
Right. Now, did you know that you had PTSD?
I knew something was wrong. I mean, I didn't diagnose myself with PTSD. In 2007, PTSD wasn't a very common term. I knew people lost their minds, went crazy, went over the edge, and I felt myself slipping in that way, and I felt it getting worse and worse over time. The physiological effects were, numbness in my arms and face, feel like my throat was swelling shut, and the inability to breathe, feel like you're gonna have a heart attack. And as there's progressed, it got to where I'd almost wake up out of a fog during intense times of operations, and it's something known as disassociation, to where you almost things aren't present time. You feel like they're a little delayed, and you're seeing yourself in third person. Those are all signs that I experienced early on, and knew there was a problem, but I didn't want to ask for help because I didn't want to be viewed to my peers as weak, and even pulled from doing my job. So I tried to push it down and continue operating. Only things got worse, and eventually the wheels flew off for me, and I had to come home and face that diagnosis.
Yeah. Now, you served 8 tours in Afghanistan. So, Kathy, what did you observe in Chad when he returned from these overseas deployments?
At first, it was different than what you would think it was. He came home, he was very quiet, kind of not his normal self, very quiet. Just needed an atmosphere that was a little more peaceful, which was really hard with 3 young kids. He was actually seeking comfort for the first 3 months. So I knew something was wrong with him. And he'll probably share a little bit more. It wasn't until after, a year into this, maybe a little less than that I thought what this post-traumatic thing that he had was over and done with, because that quiet time, the peaceful time that we needed to provide kind of ended. And we had started our own mixed martial arts gym that he got really involved in. So I thought that whatever he was dealing with was over and done with. But what had happened was it all turned into raging anger. And in our home, it was a scary place to be. There was a fake facade he was putting on the outside. And what hurt most is I knew the truth. I knew what was happening on the inside. I knew what was happening to our marriage. For the next 3 years, it was crumbling. But I have to say, though, we didn't have a solid foundation to begin with. We got married young. I was 18, he was 19. I had 3 kids by the time I was 22. I knew how to be a mom, and I knew how to somewhat be a wife and run my home. But when it came to handling this post-traumatic stress thing in the anger realm and what he was going through and have grace for him, I was not successful at.
Right. Now, how did this affect your marriage?
Yeah, so about 3 years into it, unfortunately, he stepped outside of our marriage and into relationships with other women. And for me, I was done with that. So you put the anger on, the atmosphere of what was going on in our home, the destruction of the family, the kids being emotionally hurt every day, and then the lies and betrayal. I finally said enough was enough, and that's when our marriage finally came to a point that we put our house up for sale, and I moved into my own place, and he moved into his place, and I went ahead and filed divorce papers a little while later.
Chad, tell us about the turning point in your life when you were separated from your wife, living in an apartment, and you were considering suicide. Your wife actually visited your apartment. What did she say to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, that time apart, living in separate places, really gave me a time to reflect on the damage I had done to my my wife, my children, and really coming to the conclusion that, I was the common denominator. The problem was me. And that led me to make this thought to come over me that maybe my family would be sad without me, but they would be better off. And I made a decision I was going to take my life. That same, hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of over 20 veterans every single day. That somehow our family, some of our loved ones would think they'd be sad without us, but they would be better off. And again, I decided I was going to take my life. And I would sit in my closet. I had my family pictures I'd put on my floor around me. And I had a Glock 22, which is a 40 caliber pistol. And I tried to build up the courage to pull that trigger. And the one thing that kept me from doing it was the knowledge that someone would actually find me. I mean, you're going to go missing, or someone's going to hear the gunshot. And the only person that had a key to my apartment at the time was my son, Hunter. So I couldn't imagine my kid finding me that way. And that would be enough to pump the brakes. But the next day I was back at that thought again and that desire to end my life. And it was during one of those moments that my wife knocked at my door and interrupted me being in that moment. And I answered the door, and we got into an argument because we were arguing about everything at a time. And in the middle of that argument, she asked me a question that, challenged me and probably saved my life. She asked me how I could do everything I did in the Marine Corps. She saw me go into special operations and the amount of discipline and work it took to do that, training for MMA fights and being successful, winning a world title and all these things that she saw me do in my life that took so much discipline and hard work. She's like, how could you do all of that? And when it comes to your family, you'll quit. And that question really challenged me. I'd been successful in professional things. When it came to the most important things, being a husband, being a father, being, for me, that young 17-year-old kid that went to Marine Corps boot camp and made oath to the Marine Corps, my country, myself, to do something important in my life. I quit on all those things, including my own will to live. And I made a radical decision in that moment that I was going to work hard, use that same discipline and work ethic to put my life back together. It had nothing to do with my faith at the time. I just knew that I couldn't do it alone, and I couldn't do it with the people I was surrounded by. I needed accountability in my life, and Kathy introduced me to a man named Steve from her church she was going to, that stepped into my life and began to mentor me and really challenged me and helped me to move forward. And that ultimately led to the restoration of my faith and me making a decision to really calibrate my life to the life I believe I was created to live. And that decision resulted in restoration in our marriage and in my own brokenness, having hope again to live, and ultimately what I think I've sought my whole life, and that's purpose. And we were created that purpose. We're meant to have purpose. People leave the military with a lot of purpose and mission, and when they wake up one day and they don't have it, I think that's the major result of suicide. For me, having a purpose again was instrumental in me having a desire to share with others what I had discovered. I had realized so many other veterans were struggling with the same thing, and I felt a burden on my heart to pay it forward, and that manifested in the founding of Mighty Oaks Foundation.
That's amazing. So, Chad, what advice do you have for anyone watching right now who may be considering suicide?
Well, a simple message that there is hope. I mean, when you're in those darkest moments, you believe that no one can feel like you, no one's life could be as bad as yours. You feel like you're going to be there forever and it'll never end, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and that's just not true. There is a better day around the corner. It may not feel like it right now. It may feel like this is forever, but that's just not the case. And you can't make a permanent decision, which suicide is a very permanent decision, to temporary problems. Get help, reach out, share the things you're struggling with. I'll say from a faith-based perspective, my relationship with Christ radically saved my life. If you haven't given God a chance in your life, then, what do you have to lose? I came to this moment for me to realize I had tried everything. Nothing worked. We have a saying at Mighty Oaks Foundation, if what you're trying isn't working, why not try something different? Try something different. And for me, I would even say, give God a chance in your life.
Right. So what other preventative steps can people take to ensure consistent spiritual growth?
Accountability, fellowship. For me, I had spent a lot of time going to church, but was never in any kind of relationship or fellowship with people, and I had no accountability in my life. So I went to church to check the box, but there was no one to ensure that I was living the principles that I was learning and preaching or saying I subscribe to. And so having accountability in your life is very important. Having someone in your life that you can be vulnerable and transparent to completely. I mean, maybe that's not your spouse. You can't always, a woman can't talk to her husband about all the things that women struggle with at times, and men can't speak to their wives about maybe some of the temptations they're having or struggles they're having. So it's important to have same-sex accountability and partnerships at a very transparent, deep level in your life to be able to walk through life together with.
Chad, where can people get a hold of your book?
Yeah, so An Unfair Advantage is available on Amazon and any of your major retail outlets, Barnes & Noble. The easiest way to get it is right there on Amazon, and get a copy, if not for yourself, for anyone that might be struggling. And part of the proceeds of getting a copy of An Unfair Advantage helps me to give books away to our troops. I've given away over 100,000 copies now, and it's awesome to see a grateful nation of Americans get behind an effort like that. If any veterans are struggling, or anybody, first responders, spouses are struggling, know that there's help. Our program, Mighty Oaks Programs.org, all the programs are covered. We cover all the costs, including travel, and so yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Chad and Kathy Robichaux. Chad is the author of An Unfair Advantage, Victory in the Midst of Battle. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having
us on.
I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.